the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. For the past 3 years, Cincinnatians have focused in an extraordinary way on the challenges we face around childhood poverty. The issue, of course, is not just what is the scope and what are the dynamics of the problem, but what can be done about the issue. The Green Light Fund, which entered Cincinnati 2 years ago, looks for opportunities for transformation around urgent issues that can be addressed with effective action. Green Light then scouts the nation for organizations that are effective, builds local support, and then brings a new approach into one of the 6 regions that it operates. Last Monday, on the balcony of the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, Green Light announced its second Cincinnati effort, the Family Independence Initiative. National CEO of the FII spoke of the program's track record in the 6 cities where it already operates.
Currently working with about 2,000 households across the country, and on average those households are increasing their incomes by 20%, decreasing their subsidies by 60%, as well as increasing their savings from $100 to $1,000, educational outcomes. And again, this is what people want to do for themselves, and once they're put in a position to be able to do so, achieve it.
I am joined this morning by 3 people critical to bringing this initiative to Cincinnati. Tara Noland is the executive director of the Green Light Fund here in Cincinnati. Ms. Noland has been working for about 2 years on this. Katz is the president and CEO of the Greater Cincinnati Foundation. Before moving to GCF, Ms. Katz worked for and led the Children's Home of Cincinnati, one of my favorite organizations. And Vashti Rutlege is the Cincinnati director of the Family Independence Initiative. Ms. Rutlege is a Cincinnati native with extensive experience in both social services and philanthropy, with a focus on children, families, and vulnerable populations. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thanks for
Tara,
having
welcome
us.
back. You were just, both of you, welcome back, but you were just here a month ago or so talking about your first initiative. But Tara, the founder of FII, Lim Miller, he just published a book that's entitled Alternative, Most of What You Believe About Poverty is Wrong. What's wrong with the approach that the United States has been pursuing for the last 50 years since the Great Society program, and how is this different?
Well, one thing that we really love about FII as a model is that it takes a way that we've been traditionally looking at families who are in poverty in a deficits-based model, and instead flips that on its head, looking at what are the strengths of these families. And if we put trust in these families and instead focus on the initiative that they're taking, the creativity that they have, and basically try to remove as many barriers to them being able to make success for their families as possible, that then what they'll be able to do, what they'll be able to create for their own families will be really powerful. And Vashti can probably speak a little more to that.
And we will
as well.
talk about how this actually operates as we go along. So, Ellen, one of the things you announced on Monday, that this was $1.8 million investment that the GCF is making in this effort. If I understand correctly, that's the largest single investment you've ever made in a program. Something jumped out off the paper for you on this. What was it?
It did. Well, we're really looking at significant issues in our community in a lot of different ways. So, for example, we house the Women's Fund, and they've been doing some research that, particularly around the cliff effect, that showed how hard families are working and are able to actually get themselves to a more self-sufficient place, but the system bounces them back. And so we've been looking for
the cliff effect and all of that stuff.
Exactly. So we've been looking for solutions and thinking about how can GCF as a whole fuel some solutions to what we've been learning through research that's happening within our walls. And meanwhile, working on initiatives across the community that are addressing poverty and family poverty. And along comes the Family Independence Initiative, and we all have been partnering and getting to know each other a lot better. And we really loved the philosophical underpinnings of the model, which Tara just explained. And it was just like it all just fit together. And we thought, this is it. This is a great opportunity.
So you've invested $1.8 million. Green Light's investing $600,000. So $2.4 million is invested to get this off the ground. Vashti, how's this going to work? What for a family, how does this work?
So for a family, since the launch, actually, I can speak to how it's going to start working because families have already reached out and started to call me and say, I heard about this, I want to get involved. And so what happens is we have a conversation. So yesterday morning, I jumped on the phone with a young mother and we talked about, she told me a little bit about herself and her story, and then I shared about FII, what the opportunity is. The first thing that I share is that you're going to need to find a group of people that you want to spend your time with and work together on your goal. So we ask families to create their own cohorts, 6 to 8 families that are going to meet on a monthly basis and talk about the goals that they've set for each other. They hold each other accountable. What's your goal? What did you do this month to work on it? What's your challenges? What were the opportunities that you were able to capture or missed out on? And that is really how FII works. We give families the space to work together and be successful. It's that natural sense of community and capital that they share that really sees them strive to meet their goals because they have that extra push. They have, you know, if this was my group, I would have Ellen and Tara rooting me on. And that extra little push really means something to families. And over the course of 2 years, we see that a lot of families reach those goals that they've set for themselves.
So do the families get financial assistance to get move towards those goals?
So one of the things that we do is that we ask families to share a lot of information with us. And in order to do that, we provide them with a small technology stipend. And that's to make sure they have a tablet or a new phone, whatever they need to log in and get into our cloud-based system. We also say, if you're sharing your data with us on a monthly basis, we want to respect that you are doing that and provide some incentive for that. And so we provide them a small data stipend as well during those first 6 months for the information that they share with us, because that gives us an opportunity to share with GCF and the Green Light Fund how we're doing, and then the families use that same data so they can look at their own progress. After the first 6 months, that's when they can tap into our larger resource pool. So that's where capital is available for matching funds, for scholarships, and for other opportunities that might help a family push towards a goal.
So there's a 6-month sort of prep period where people need to kind of do their own work and get themselves ready to access the funding.
To access the funding, but even the funding that we're providing is they're still working towards their goals. Right. After those 6 months, we're just providing a little extra.
You know, I don't want to confuse the issue, but there's certain elements of this that very much sound, if you, the Dream Manager model that Jancoa uses, Mary Miller uses. There's certain, it's saying people know what they need.
Right.
Let's trust them and let's then build on that. I mean, there's lots of examples of this. That also, though, turns on the head the traditional social service model, which sort of puts the caseworker in. I don't know if it removes the caseworker, just puts the caseworker in a different role. I'm not sure how to think about that.
Well, so Greenlight is very focused on filling gaps in our community, and so we have tremendous social services that are working for families, especially for families who are experiencing crisis. So if you are facing a domestic violence crisis, a homeless situation, FII is not the right program for you at the right time. So families will always need much more extensive services than FII provides. What FII, the gap that they're filling, is for families who they're past these crisis situations. A lot of families we expect will be coming from partner organizations who have worked with them to help them get to the place where they are today. And so FII is really for families who are most FII families are working, but they're probably not working in jobs that are paying a living wage, or they're working multiple jobs. And so FII is there for families who are ready to go to hopefully move above the poverty line and stay above the poverty line, not necessarily for families who need much more extensive interventions.
And they will have crises.
Yes,
right?
they will.
So the thing that's amazing about FII is it provides the financial and social capital that we all have grown accustomed to in our lives. So if we have a crisis that could set us way, way back, we
like
could probably,
losing a car, for example.
Like losing a car, for example.
Right.
We could probably access capital, or we would have a social network that we could reach out to say, you know, I'm sick, or my children are sick and they need childcare because I have to get to work. So crises will come, but they've built this
So this is
network.
really rebuilding from the grassroots up, a sense of community, functioning communities. rather than a lot of the criticism of plans, programs in the last 50 years, is they build in dependence rather than independence, no matter what the language is. Vashti, this is operating in 6 other places. We had that little clip, but is there evidence that it really works, and what are the metrics that are used to measure?
So there definitely is evidence that it works. And our largest site is Boston, where there are 1,000 families enrolled in FII. And what we've seen with families that have been involved is that over 2 years, the subsidies that families are drawing down on decreases by 60%. And families increase their savings from anywhere from $0 to $100 to $1,000. And for some people that might say, oh, that's not, a monumental amount. But when you think about when your car breaks down, if you have nothing in your savings or you have $1,000 in your savings, that could be the difference in being able to get your car fixed and to continue to go to work versus potentially having to figure out how you're going to take public transportation, drop your kids off at childcare, still make it to work on time, right? Those are the types of small obstacles for families that can turn into a crisis when they don't have the capital, social, and financial in order to weather through those. And so we see that savings really makes a difference. Families typically draw down about $2,400 from FII during their 2 years of involvement. But what does that look like on the other end for families is that their assets as a whole tend to increase by closer to $5,800, and their annual salaries are increasing by 23%. When we see those numbers, we say this is definitely working.
How many families do you think, with the sort of really remarkable support that you've got to get this started, how many families do you hope you can enroll over this, let's say, the next 2 years?
Well, 500 was what we were really looking at, and
that's families, not individuals.
Right. Yeah, and this is what was also incredibly inspiring for the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, is that Greenlight is a seed funder for any initiative that they bring to town. So they had the resources to fund 100 families. And FII said we'll have a goal of 500. So we thought, what if we just accelerated them to that goal the minute they set foot in town so that they could leverage a higher goal? So we're ready to fund 500 families collectively, and FII may have the resources to move further.
Yes, and for us, we said, okay, we have the resources for 500, now let's extend ourselves out and say we want to reach 1,000 families. So especially because we're looking at this as a regional approach, this isn't just for families living within the borders of Cincinnati, this is for families across our region. And so we know that there are families in poverty in our rural communities, across the river, in northern Kentucky, and in some of the deep poverty that we have right here in Cincinnati.
And in suburban communities. Poverty is not just an inner city issue anymore.
No, not at all.
That's right.
So we definitely would like to reach 1,000 families over the next 4 years.
And one thing we love about this model is that it's so organic. Families are doing the work, Vashti is not doing the work. And so we're not looking at a model where we have to add an additional staff member for every 20 families. Because families are doing the work themselves, if we can get additional support for this program, it just means more families can participate.
Yeah. I want to say, though, it's the problem of being a historian. There have been programs in the past that have been very democratic like this, putting power in the hands of ordinary people. And there's terrible backlashes because the experts know better than. And it's interesting, has there been any of that kind of reaction from the social service community, very, very bluntly, that this is a good approach or a bad approach?
Yeah,
I think so far the response we've gotten from community partners has been fantastic. Part of the reason why, and as someone who has sat on that side of the table as well, we recognize that we're not doing a fantastic job of getting families out of poverty, right? We're working really hard. People go into the work with an incredible heart. But what we see is that we're not really having transformational change at the community level. So everybody knows we need to do something different. And so when I talk to community partners, they know who the families are. They know who the families are that they've worked with, that they've seen make some progress, but who haven't been able to sustain that progress. And that's really where FII fits in. So what they see us as is an opportunity to provide capital to families where they never would be able to do that with their current structure.
In a recent interview, it's in the New York Times on this past Wednesday, with the founder of FII, he mentioned that he grew up in a very poor family, but somehow his mother figured out how to get him to college. And point being, that families know how to do things if you just empower. But scalability, GCF has helped scale this much larger than it would normally start. But ultimately, is the hope here that you hold up a model that may change what else is happening and it actually, on a policy level, changes the way we deliver services?
Yeah, well, I think that's a goal of FII National, right, is to really influence policy.
Definitely what we hope to see is that as families become more successful, they become advocates for themselves and their community, and that their voices are able to amplify their success to the decision makers in their community, and that we can shift policy. Because what we know is that when we give family the resources, they're able to come up with the solutions. So if I want to buy a house, and I don't really know anything about purchasing a house, I'm kind of like, what should I do? But in my group, someone else may have been already a homeowner, or they know someone who they could bring to talk to all of us about home buying. And that's where the collective capital really has the opportunity to take a hold. And that same ability is what families could do when they go out to speak to their community about how they've been able to be successful.
What's really exciting about this to me is it's out of the box. It is another way of thinking about things. And we have a chance to test it, and we'll see how far we can take it. This is really a wonderful program. You're going to be back. Okay?
Great.
So, to learn more about the Family Independence Initiative, go to the web at www.ffi.org, sites, and then /Cincinnati, or call the telephone number 513-795-6576. Thank you for making Newsmaker. Oh no, next, stay tuned. Right after the break, a creative response to the current national deadlock in Washington. Welcome back. For over a decade now, citizens have been motivated to organize and press their representatives to vote certain ways, and in the process, take stands against the president. That was the origin of the Tea Party movement when Barack Obama was in the White House. Now, in the last 7 months, that is what we have been seen directed at President Trump, beginning with the women's marches in Washington and around the country the day after the inauguration. Since then, progressives have flooded congressional offices with calls and emails on health care and education and environmental issues and immigration policies of the Trump administration. Locally, a new effort is being organized that is more subtle and thoughtful. A group of progressive citizens, many with ties to Xavier University in one way or another, want to encourage every senator to read, reflect, and be inspired by John F. Kennedy's 1957 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, Profiles in Courage. They are organizing now to find ways to get a copy of the book into the hands of every senator. I am joined this morning by two people working on this initiative. Bob Zimmerman is a professor emeritus of economics at Xavier University, where he taught for 33 years, and Dave Flaspohler worked at Xavier for nearly 40 years as a mathematics professor and as an administrator, and all-around sort of person who could be called on to do almost anything, in my experience of being there.
Utility infielder.
Utility infielder. You were there. You did some unbelievable jobs. So anyway, Dave, let's start out. What's the motivation here? What got you to this point and the germ of this idea?
Well, there's been a lot of talk recently, or not recently, over a long period of time, about the polarity that is existing in politics throughout the country. And I think that's a real dangerous situation. And we thought that maybe it made sense to get people thinking, get our representatives thinking a little bit differently. I think that there's been so much emphasis on party, and that's fine, but not the be-all and end-all.
Well, one thing people might say to that is, well, John Kennedy, he was a Democrat, and therefore, aren't you just calling on a Democrat here? But Profiles in Courage is...
The book is not a book that is limited to just a Democratic perspective. And in fact, I defy almost anybody to read the book and say that they agree with every one of those senators whose listed or who's described in the book. I think he did a good job of covering the gamut.
Yeah, one of the things that this grew out of too was the Kennedy Committee in the Senate had been asked before he did this book to select 5 of the greatest senators of all time to be enshrined in the cloakroom. And he ended up with Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, John Calhoun, all pre-Civil War people, Bob Taft of Ohio, and Robert La Follette of Wisconsin.
Okay.
In the 20th century. So people from all over the spectrum, the political spectrum. So Bob, this book isn't necessarily in easy use. You can't get it real easily. What have you been doing to try to get the books that you need? You're focused on senators on this particular one, so you got 100. Right. You don't have the 400 and whatever.
Right. Thank God.
Yeah. So what have you been doing to gather the books?
Well, I, for some reason, became motivated to reread the book, and I knew we had a copy someplace in my house, but we were unable to find it. So my wife, Betsy, went to Half Price Books and bought me a copy. And after I reread it, after many, many years before that I had read it earlier, but I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could get a copy of these books in the hands of the 100 senators, many of whom I know are younger than I, and some of them perhaps had never read this book. And what a legacy that these senators today have to uphold. And so I went back to Half Price Books and got them to find all that they could find locally first, and so I bought a bunch of them, or we bought a bunch of them to begin with, and then they started expanding throughout the whole U.S. There are lots of half-price bookstores throughout the United States. And I picked up 4 large boxes filled with these books. We're still in the process of trying to figure exactly how we're going to deliver them to the various senators.
Because you want to make sure they get in the hands of the senators themselves, not to some aide who sticks it in a closet someplace.
Right.
Yeah. You know, one of the things I want to point out is one of the essays in here that I find most interesting is about Robert Taft. Cincinnatian, one of the 5 people that was enshrined as one of the original 5. He is honored for 2 reasons. He's seen as a person of courage. Now, he couldn't have been more politically opposite of Kennedy. He was Mr. Conservative, Mr. Republican. He was recognized by John F. Kennedy in this book for 2 basic reasons. One, he stood against his party and supported government-funded, quality, low-income public housing. And I truly believe that comes from his experience in Cincinnati, from what was going on here. And secondly, he opposed the Nuremberg trials after World War II because he thought it was just dressing up retribution in legal language, and he thought that was a bad precedent. And that may have cost him the nomination for president in '52. And so here is a local person who really took a stand that, you know, goes against what people might have pigeonholed him in. So those are the kind of essays you get here. That's what's really interesting.
That's right.
Could I make a comment? There are approximately 50 people that are involved in our group. And while they come from a variety of backgrounds, they're not all retirees from Xavier University. So they come from a variety of backgrounds, and they hold a variety of opinions politically. So while we have political views, I want to stress that this project is not apolitical, it is
Nonpartisan?
Nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan, goes across.
And I think it's important to stress that. So we're not supporting either party. It's nonpartisan.
Well, I want to follow this as you are able to distribute these and find out, and of course let's start in Ohio. We got a couple of senators, and let's see if we can figure out a way to get those in their hands, and then let's see what happens with this and what kind of discussion it might stir up. So thank you very much for what you're doing, and we'll be back.
Okay, right. So, thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.